Welcome to Mind Overboard. In this video, I want to spend some time discussing an interesting connection between the controversy developing around transgender athletes, the use of performance-enhancing drugs, or PEDs, and the role of human physical limitations in athletic competition. I recommend you check out the Rationality Rules channel for up-to-date information on some of the primary concerns surrounding the participation of transgender individuals in elite athletics. It's a well-researched video that elucidates details of the biological aspect of the subject. It also lays out a clear argument about why establishing a delineation of athletic categorization that's not solely dependent on gender works in the best interest of creating a level playing field. While I agree that this appears to be the best approach to finding the most reasonable solution, there's also a simple observation that both illuminates the need to examine our categorizations further, but also rests outside the biological assertions, namely that the competitions in which transgender athletes are disrupting the status quo, smashing records, and dominating the field of competition all involve transgender women rather than men. Aside from supporting the need to rethink how we categorize athletes, this also introduces an opportunity to include PEDs in the conversation by emphasizing the role of human limitation in our continued athletic progress. The connection here is tied to the fact that in our emphatic drive to prove ourselves and break records, we find that crashing through barriers in a significant way motivates and inspires us in some instances while raising our hackles in others. It seems to be a commonly held conception that as we collectively learn more about how the human body works and develop advanced training and dietary regimens that help unlock our athletic potential, we're on a slow and steady march in the direction of constant improvement. Given this, and in light of the fact that we're occasionally blessed with athletes who achieve breakthrough performance that excites and titillates the senses, it's unusual to consider the fact that for every competition we can create, there is a foreseeable end to its phase of record breaking. All advancement will eventually cease, and we will be required to enjoy athleticism for its own sake. This will be due to the athletes reaching their respective wall of human performance, based merely on the fact that there are engineering limitations imposed upon the human body, or any body for that matter. Take as an example the current world record holder for deadlift at 1,102 pounds, Eddie Hall. His lift was an unbelievable feat of strength. It's possible that it will be surpassed at some point, but I predict that the unsurpassable record will not be much higher. The reason behind this is based partially on the colloquial wisdom that there's a connection between body mass and weightlifting proficiency. If you want to build mass, you have to lift heavier weight. If you plateau on your lifting capacity, it's recommended that you gain body mass to put up bigger numbers. In other words, increase the size of your base. The two are connected to each other in some way. However, at the upper end of weightlifting classes and powerlifting, increased mass doesn't seem to provide a significant advantage. Not that Eddie Hall is small, he's 6'3" and 360 pounds, but he has competitors in Brian Shaw and Hafthor Bjornsson who are each around 6'8" to 6'9" and 440 to 450 pounds. Despite this, they don't put up heavier numbers, nor does anyone else at this point. Everyone seems to be clustering just below the 500 kilogram threshold, and Eddie is the only one who's punched through. If you watch Eddie after his lift, you can see his glassy eyes and wobbly countenance. His own account of the event indicates possible acute neuropathy. He reports going blind for a period of time and had numbness and other dysfunctions. This is not dissimilar to stories from other lifters in his class. There's a deadlift training technique called a rack pull. You put the rack safeties a few inches below full lockout, and then practice doing the last few inches of the lift with a heavier than normal weight. This familiarizes your body with exploding through the end of the lift to ensure you get green lights that legitimize a completed lift. There are a handful of lifters who have reported similar neurological problems, numbness, shooting pain, or a minor palsy when lifting 1,200 to 1,300 pounds for this short distance. This is likely related to the limitations of our vertebral discs. Our vertebrae are separated by discs, which are like little jelly donuts that keep the bones spaced out and relieve pressure from the spinal cord. When the discs bulge or suffer an actual herniation, they can impinge on the cord and cause these types of problems. Discs are not like muscles or tendons. You don't work them or improve them, they're just there. And if you lift a weight that exceeds their structural capacity, they're going to collapse. There's no way around it. Our technology and knowledge have allowed us to find this structural limitation in our biological composition. This is the sort of thing you can't test intentionally due to the inherent danger and ethical concerns. We will get to the point where trying to break through the top weightlifting barrier will become exceedingly dangerous. These types of limitations apply to every physical activity to some degree. But we want to find these limitations. In conjunction with improving technology and increased knowledge, the act of record breaking represents an attempt to reach the functional limitations imposed by the way the body is engineered. And we celebrate record breaking in almost every measurable statistic related to sports, but it has to be actively pursued. Every so often we come across an individual who's predisposed to phenomenal performance at certain activities due to biological uniqueness, but these discoveries are only possible under just the right circumstances, when athletic excellence is combined with extreme self-motivation, competitiveness, and a drive to excel. These factors would have to emerge at the right time and place where the athlete also has the opportunity to discover their talent at a given activity. It's almost certain that there are people who would be better at a particular activity than anyone in history and never discover their talent. So when these freaks, in a good way, show up, we get the abbreviated illusion that boundaries are waiting to be smashed at any given moment. But this is not the case. Given this, and given the fact that there seems to be an underlying drive to reach that pinnacle in every elite athletic endeavor we pursue, it should be reasonable to expect athletes to use every tool at their disposal to achieve their goals. Instead, we expect our athletes to spend an unfathomable amount of time, money, and energy toward the fulfillment of their goals and our entertainment, but with an arbitrary threshold, utilizing performance-enhancing drugs, that surpassing would result in being labeled a cheater. The most well-known example of this is Lance Armstrong. Lance and his team employed a strategy of letting no detail go overlooked and putting in whatever effort was necessary to achieve that final 1% performance gain. There is no cost-benefit evaluation. Benefits are just pursued. Many PEDs are synthetic versions of naturally occurring chemicals, and others are designed to manipulate your chemistry. Lance had an exacting regimen set up that allowed him to dose and train at just the right amount and in intervals that ensured he wouldn't fail any test. Since they were expecting to find chemicals that naturally occur in the body, the markers weren't being tested on a pass-fail basis. They were being tested for thresholds, so he just never exceeded allowable thresholds. Despite passing these tests, they continued to test his blood for years, until the testing technology was able to directly detect the specific drugs being utilized. Years after the events, they finally nailed him for being a cheater, and when he fell from grace, he was hammered for his behavior and deception. But this was only the result of the way we've chosen to frame things. He committed everything to achieve excellence, and we idolized him. He passed all the tests, but we still asked him flat out whether he took drugs. At that point, there's not much to do other than lie and hope for the best. Otherwise, you're just voluntarily ending your career over a simple interview. He was a singular talent and a biological freak. He matched that up with the right drug and nutrition program, an unbelievable work ethic, and capacity for training. When others were celebrating the end of the tour, he was at home training for the next. He didn't get where he was purely by drugs. In competition, there are no guarantees. He outpaced the competition by unprecedented lengths. Who officially won those tours at this point? Does anyone know or care? And what do the current winners, competitive overachievers in their own right, think about being handed an award years afterward? Do they feel like winners? The reality is that the official winners are far down the list of finishers, because all of Lance's competitors, eager to see him get his comeuppance, were also eventually eliminated due to positive drug tests. It's the unspoken rule of maximizing performance in elite athletics. This actually leads me to a place of sympathy towards PEDs. Athletes performing at an extremely slender percentile are driven to succeed at all costs, and are often willing to take extreme measures to explore the limitations of the human body. We have no problem with advanced nutrition, training, testing, and nutritional supplementation, but we are somehow unable to look past the needle when everything we strive for and celebrate encourages making extreme sacrifices to achieve unbelievable results. We seem to be overcome with vicarious ecstasy when our favorite athletes achieve the unbelievable, setting ourselves up to be deeply wounded if we find out they've cheated. For some reason, we consider PEDs cheating, despite the fact that, quote-unquote, natural or not, your performance can't break through the ultimate wall of limitation. This seems to be related to the way people are currently responding to transgender athletes who are doing really well. No one seems to care much that they're there, but when they start breaking records, there's a similar visceral negative response. The public feels like they're being deceived in some way. The answer here occupies a middle ground. PEDs seem to play a role in allowing us to push ourselves toward the pinnacle of athletic achievement, but it's important to have some sort of limitation or balance, if for no other reason than to protect the health of the athlete. In pursuit of this, it makes sense to lay out a reasonable standard for testing. Once tested and passed, the athlete is certified and the issue is dropped until the next event, season, testing cycle, or whatever. It can be simple and straightforward. Any thresholds we set would be in consideration for maintaining reasonably healthy standards for the athletes. There are several examples of why we would want to continue to impose limitations and more severely restrict certain types of sports. Football players have been destroying themselves for decades, and we've intuitively known it but haven't bothered to verify. In driver's education, we all learned that a car accident involves 3 impacts: car to car, human to inside of human to inside of human. No matter how advanced helmet technology becomes, you can't prevent someone's brain from compressing on the back of their forehead. We don't need harder hits in football. Similarly, I've seen reports that some PEDs raise pain tolerance, which is incredibly dangerous in a sport like mixed martial arts. It would be counterintuitive to allow unfettered access to fish tranquilizers and bull semen so athletes can go out and literally destroy themselves for our pleasure. I think this all comes together to explain the initial negative reaction to transgender athletes. At the elite level, small changes have big impacts because so much of what they do is the result of unbelievably detailed preparations, and so much of the rules and regulations that govern those events are intended to provide a level playing field. When a transgender athlete pulls significantly away from the field of competition, much like our reaction to PEDs, some people feel cheated or deceived. This reaction is amplified when there's what may be considered a clear or apparent differentiating factor that causes the outcome. However, in reality, when the factor in question is biological, we're usually talking talking about a somewhat arbitrary distinction, in that we may set parameters, but the factors that we choose to identify as cheating are never as overt as something like sabotaging another athlete's equipment to gain an advantage. We've just managed to find a demarcation that has worked relatively well for a relatively long time, but the arbitrary nature of these distinctions, along with changes in our technology and understanding, have left us with a clear need to redefine those demarcations. It seems like there's some room, as we reconsider what biological markers are important in distinguishing how we categorize and separate the field of competition, to consider the role of PEDs in our ongoing quest to seek out the limitations of human achievement. Doing so could make these issues tractable. Given our reverence for extreme athleticism and an overall appreciation for what athletes are willing to sacrifice to test the limits of human achievement, we could find ourselves in an overall healthier and more enjoyable athletic environment, in which athletes are free to be themselves, work to achieve their personal best results, and make their own judgment about what they're willing to sacrifice to push their limits, without fear of being shunned or discarded for deigning to give the audience exactly what they're looking for. Do you disagree? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this in the comments below, and for you to become a part of the ongoing conversation by subscribing to the channel. I hope you enjoyed the video, and thanks for watching.